Welcome everyone. My name is Alfredo Saria. I'm an events chair for NIPE. Each year we conduct a survey of our 4,000 members and pick the themes the community wants to hear most about. Surprisingly or not, data identity and order agent rank really high. Furthermore, the timing lined up really well with the foundational paper that Jelena Hoffart and David Birch put out last year. That paper was a key reason why we have today a star-studded panel from the empty space, from the network side of the house, the issuers, and the merchants. Three housekeeping items before we get started. Please turn your cameras off so the focus is on the panelists. Drop the questions on the chat as they come up, and we'll try to answer as they come up or towards the end. And lastly, once we wrap up after an hour, if we can stay optional, we break up the sessions in small rooms for networking. And I find really valuable those sessions after the actual panel. So my job tonight is to stay out of the way. Yelena, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. We'll start by having each of the panelists introduce themselves and their role. We'll start with Craig.
Hey, good evening, folks. I'm Craig Gilbert with MasterCard based out of St. Louis, Missouri. I've been working in the agentic sphere for the last year and a half. I'm very forward to the session today.
Pravesh.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Pravesh Rijal with Cross River Bank out of Fort Lee, New Jersey. I lead AI initiative here at the bank, which also means I'm leading the AI native operating model and agentic commerce. Looking forward.
And Robbie.
Hi everyone, I'm Robbie McDermott. I'm in the solution at CMSPI focused on identifying the payments implications of agentic commerce. Looking forward to the discussion.
Amazing. We have a great group, so thank you panelists for being here. And I'm excited to moderate today. My name is Jelena Hoffert, and I am the head of strategy and corporate development at Centrelink. The genesis of all of this is about 2 years ago, I started ideating on the question of what happens once AI agents, not humans, open bank accounts, authenticate and log into those accounts, and even make payments. So answering the question, what happens when agents are now the users of financial services? 2 years later, that world is quickly becoming a reality. And I think, we're really all here today because we believe one thing, which is that we need to move past traditional KYC or know your customer, where we need to understand if a human is who they say they are, to now answering a fundamentally different and much harder question, which is, who is this agent? Is this agent acting on behalf of a legitimate human user? And does this agent have the permissions to carry out the actions they're undertaking? So in the paper I published defining Know Your Agent in the Journal of Digital Banking, I define the Know Your Agent problem as solving agent identity, authentication, and then authorization. And as we'll talk about today with these panelists, this is all a critical precursor to enabling agentic commerce. So let's dig into it. I'll first start with Robbie and Pravesh. You both flagged something important, which is that there's a real difference between a bot pinging an API versus an AI that is exploring, deciding, and purchasing on behalf of consumer in a single live context. Help the room here see what the line is between machine payments and agentic commerce and where the KYA implications actually diverge.
Great. Maybe I can start. I think the one-word answer where the difference is discretion, right? A machine payment is deterministic. So a server calls an API, pays an invoice, you're done. There is an intent and there is an outcome, and most potentially yes then no, that those two are the identical things. Now, when you think about agentic commerce, I think agentic is fundamentally different because agent has a judgment. So you talk to your agent and you're like, okay, restock my fridge. And your agent has your credit card, and then your agent knows your pattern, the agent knows where to go shop. Now, restock my kitchen your AI is now browsing and taking a lot of micro decision and then acting on it. Those micro decisions were never explicitly approved. So I think that is what is the difference. So API is an orchestration, it's a ping, that's machine. And truly agentic is really it's in context finance. I almost would like to call it that way. It's like, it's you're taking financial decisions, commerce decisions in context. So that's the distinctions I would like to draw.
Yeah, to add to that from Pravesh, I think that because this is, let's say, the newest space in the industry, there are a ton of terms flying around, and there's almost too much to do, and it's moving too quickly to be able to nail down exactly what the first step is. And I know, as we talk about KYA, we say, well, what do we actually have to do first? Um, there's many different ways that AI and agents will make its way into payments. And when we were talking in prep for this panel, we were talking about machine payments as this is your X402. This is an agent pinging an API. It's a replacement of the sort of payment for eyeballs type thing of adverts on the internet. This is now payment for agentic eyeballs for getting access to your data. Now that makes a lot of sense for merchants, companies that are producing data that agents will want to access. So news organizations, anyone that has valuable information to be sold, that you can sort of no longer, or certainly less now, monetize through advertisements to humans. And then you've got your agentic commerce on the other side, but you also have so many different layers of agentic commerce as well. Today, what we really have is no agentic commerce. There isn't really, at least widespread adoption. I would argue even like minimal adoption isn't there yet. It's the testers and the, people trying to break things that are using it, and fraudsters at the moment as well. But fundamentally, there's such a significant difference and impact on what do we mean by KYA, whether you're talking about a human in the loop transaction where there's a human actually being assisted in the act of purchasing. They're there the whole time. They're searching for the best pair of sneakers, and they're there clicking yes at, multiple steps along the way. There's human in the loop where they've provided initial intent, but then gone away and the agent's gone and found something. And then maybe they're being brought in at the last hurdle to approve a final transaction. That's another use case we need to plan for at large. And there's the final step of human not in the loop, which is the scarier, more difficult, less of an existing framework to work on, but also the much, much farther away use case as well is important to note. So I know a lot of sessions like this one today, we are the dreamers thinking about the 5, 10, 20 years time version of this. But there are things happening today that we need to plan for in KYA. So that was the interesting point from our side is just we need to be very specific about the definitions of where we're talking about implementing KYA, because some of them are a little bit easier to do using existing frameworks than others.
Yeah, it's a good question because if you're loose and fast with this definition, even a recurring subscription payment you already pay could be classified as an agentic payment, right? It happens without human interaction and we all want it. But I think that was also a good distinction when you talk about the different levels to it, whether it's, fully autonomous versus human in the loop. And I think, of course, we always look to the fully autonomous vision. But the identity and some of the fraud infrastructure we have is so nascent that we really have to have that in place before we can even think towards not only human in the loop, but the fully autonomous version. Although I might disagree with you slightly that I think that fully autonomous vision is going to happen faster, whether we like it or not, because consumers will want it, at least a portion of them, I think, maybe a little bit more than the early adopters. Craig, now that we've kind of scoped what we mean by an agent, where does the classic KYC fail when you try to apply it here? Is it verification, the authentication, attribution, something else, all of the above?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation, and I think the ground setting that Robbie and Ravesh actually laid out is good. I mean, we have to understand it's a new space, so we're dealing with a paradigm shift. In the past, and where we had e-commerce, the core flow. As a consumer, I'm going to be going to a site and I'm going to be interacting with that site myself. So that KYC that we're talking about is really how upfront does that party, that platform owner, get to actually validate Craig the user? And there's different methods. You can do a very traditional KYC, showing some type of identity. You can do other validations. There's plenty of services and products that are out there. The paradigm shifts a little bit when we start to look at agentic because the theme is now I, as a consumer, am really reaching out and connecting with my agent, and that agent is then my proxy in going to these different sites. So then the question becomes, what is being shared? What is being conveyed? And the other theme, and I would put out here is when we say KYC, it's a little bit like when we talk about account opening. And then do you trust the consumer, the user, at account opening? Yes, because you've done the verification. But then do I still have that same level of trust 6 months after I've done the KYC? Probably not. You have to do some ongoing checks and validations. So that's going to be part of the theme. That's that, and you'll hear this a lot, the human in the loop kind of framing. How and what is sufficient enough for a merchant or any platform provider in terms of this is somebody new. So first thing I'm probably going to look at is the volume that's coming. Is it human? Is it synthetic? If it's synthetic, is it an agent? Then is it a known agent? Is it a trusted agent? And then the next thing I want to know is, even if it's a trusted agent, who is that agent representing? Is that a good actor, bad actor? And so that piece is going to be fundamental. And I think there's still, it's really being, as we're going forward, it's evolving, it's being discussed. The element of what is supposed to be shared from the agent to that that merchant and over to the issuer is still a little bit, I'd say, in a space where it's gray. It's not really fully defined. And I think we're going to see over time, we're hearing signals that some merchants might even actually block agentic flows where they don't have the right signals coming through. So that's the type of thing that we, I think, want to be thinking about and aware of around that KYC flow and how this is all going to really either help facilitate the broader adoption, like you said, or maybe cause it to kind of slow down a little bit.
Yeah. It's a really good point. One of the things that I think about frequently, and Robbie, I might be in your idealist early adoption adopter bucket, is how do we enable that fully autonomous world? And if my agent is opening a bank account, transacting, etc., my agent needs to be able to do that without having to call me as the last mile human in the loop. Think about document verification. If they ask an agent to go present a picture of an ID or passport and it's 4 a.m., like the merchant inherently has a incentive to want to let that transaction go through. Again, you don't doc V for a transaction typically, but they don't want that friction. They want to be able to make the payment to earn the money, etc. But to your point, like there is this inherent like risk decision being made there. So it's interesting that you're hearing merchants say, no, I don't want it, even if it can make me more money. But do you think that they're grappling with the other side of it of, hey, if I do enable it, maybe I'm 10xing the amount of money that I bring in?
If that's back to me, Jillian, I think it is. I think yes, it's a question right now. Everybody's trained to think about it and validate it, and it's so new. I think the stances, again, those are some early stances and what people are saying. I think it comes down to there's the other side of it, which is a lot of the merchants, as they're looking at this, are considering how do I stay connected to the consumer, and there's a little bit of a fear of being disconnected, right? And disintermediated. So like, what is that sweet spot? I've spent years inside the payment and payment authentication space, and even in that, looking at the 3 and 4 party models, that's the important element, the paradigm of how do you have trust flow through an ecosystem? What's the right level so that all parties can trust that a transaction is good? So in the end, if you do it well and do it right, all parties get the right information and can trust the flows, and you can then also use that to block out the bad actors. So I think that's going to be the question: is where is that fulcrum? What's the right balance? What's the right information? And from the merchant side, what do they need to feel like they can create that connection with the consumer that's behind that agent, and still maybe build up that brand loyalty and that broader downstream kind of opportunity.
Yeah, that's a good point about just intermediation of kind of the merchants in general. Maybe let's pull up the first poll here. So we'll ask the audience a bit about what we've been chatting about so far, which is, in your view, where does agentic commerce mostly land in the next 24 months? Is it this fully autonomous vision that I hope for? Is it something autonomous but with checkpoints, human-led, agent assistant, or phone a friend, nobody knows? Give the
Always
audience.
phone a friend with this topic, isn't it? It's yeah. Anyone making an explicit call in this space has not been in it long enough to to know that it always changes last minute.
Well, I've phoned three friends, which is all of you guys on the panel.
Okay. People are still participating. Give it another second. All right. Here we go.
Okay, survey says, wow, about half of people say human-led, agent assisted. Human always drives the final action. That makes a lot of sense. 31% are autonomous with checkpoints. And then, only 15% of people agree with me, which is fair. Um, awesome. So maybe moving on here, Pravesh, we heard from the audience just now. We heard from some of the other panelists. Let's hear from you. Is today's financial infrastructure actually prepared for a meaningful shift towards hybrid human agent or fully autonomous commerce? If not, kind of what are some of the biggest gaps and what needs to evolve to make agentic finance viable at scale?
Great question. Well, the answer is it is under construction, right? So it is under construction, and it is rapidly moving in the direction of what Craig mentioned, enabling that trust. So the layer of being a trust anchor would mean different things for different participants on that value chain. And I believe that everything needs to evolve, from fraud models to how do we ID to how do we even things around compliance and AML and stuff like that, to even what does it mean for a liability in terms of an issuer, right? So we talked today about KYA. What do we think about intent and intent capture and verification, stuff like that? So I think all of that infrastructure needs to come together for us to reach to a place where I too voted that it's completely autonomous. I'm with you there, but I don't think we are there yet. However, we are moving aggressively in that direction. Is what I would say. But again, as we chatted earlier, things change last moment, and I don't know if you ask me next week, maybe my answer is going to be different because we just discovered that we are in a different paradigm in this journey also.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Anyone else want to opine or? All right. Now we talk about the hard parts that Pravesh mentioned, which is we're not there yet. There's a lot of questions to answer, and we don't have very good answers, I don't think, at this point. One of the biggest things we're going to pull you guys on, but just to kind of preview it, is when we think about liability with respect to agents, as Pravesh mentioned. I often think about this as a self-driving car. So if a self-driving car that's in self-driving mode gets in a wreck and causes damage, who is responsible for that damage? Is it the owner of the car, but the person who wasn't at the wheel? Is it the maker of the car? There could potentially be a programming error. I like to blame Elon Musk for everything, so I'm happy to take that one. Is it the federal, state, local agency government who allowed the car on the road to begin with? We've had self-driving cars for a lot longer than agents, and I don't think we have a really good answer to this question. Maybe it plays out in court. So I'm excited to kind of dig into what the audience thinks on this. So we'll pull up the second poll here. In an agentic transaction that goes wrong purchase, wrong amount, fraudulent agent, who bears primary liability? Is it the agent platform or AI provider, the issuing bank, the merchant, the consumer, or phone a friend, something else?
I really like the self-driving car analogy as well, Jelena. While people are responding to the poll, um, self-driving cars in a number of studies have been found to be safer drivers than humans. And yet, when I got in my first Waymo down in Austin last year, it was still a little bit terrifying, or if not terrifying, still a bit weird. Um, and there is something I think a bit concerning about, like, who is going to be punished if something goes wrong here. And you can't put a self-driving car in prison. You can't throw Elon Musk in prison
Well,
for a
you
number
can.
of reasons. Well, yeah, some would. And yeah, that is strange, right? Like, how could you punish a technology? It just doesn't make sense. So I think that sort of underlies, I think, a lot of my emotional response to KYA discussions is like, oh, who is punished when something goes wrong here? It's very
And
tricky.
Robbie, to tail onto that, I remember the discussion we had when we were in MRC. The other call out is there will be agents that will be built that are in different regions, territories, and so then how do you even go back and ascribe liability to them? So that's the other kind of interesting theme, right?
Let's see what the
Okay,
audience says.
I'm ready for the results. Let's see. Share.
Wow, split. Most people say split, and also the rest of the people who chose an answer seems to be split. This is curious, though. No one voted for the merchant holding the liability, which, and Craig can probably tell me a lot more about this, but the merchant is under our existing chargeback rules, often one of the parties that's left holding the bag. So it's interesting that we think in this agentic world, the merchant's not liable. Um, Very, very interesting. Maybe we'll go back to you, Robbie. You raised the recent American Express announcement where they put a flag in the sand with three pillars. So walk us through those three pillars and how this relates to kind of who bears liability.
This is probably the first tangible example we have of a real liability framework for this. Um, I think that one important point to remember is that today we have really just a handful of AI platforms, to be verified. It's important to think about, potentially in the future, an individual could have millions of domain specific agents that are, like tasked on, strict roles, specific thing, do this, here's your guardrails. It could be distributed like that, could be unique to the individual. So, when we're designing KYA, you sort of have to consider that aspect. What American Express did is it was pretty much exactly a month ago, released two things. One's a developer kit for agentic commerce experiences, and then the other is this trademarked purchase protection, agent purchase protection. As you said, there's three critical things that are prerequisites to Amex taking liability, and I will use air quotes for that because, as you said, often the merchant is the one left with the liability in these disputes. But the three critical things, firstly, is the agent used has to have been registered and verified by American Express themselves. There's a lot of detail in the developer kit itself on what that actually means, but the reason I had the preamble to the response is today that's probably fine. You have, OpenAI and ChatGPT. You've got Gemini, you've got Copilot, which sort of runs mostly on those other two anyway now, Claude, and there's a handful there to work with and verify. And I don't think Amex stifle themselves by saying you are only able to make agentic purchases through Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, etc. Like that's absolutely fine for consumers today. In future, maybe not, but something to consider. The second thing Amex needs is, authenticated user intent, I suppose. It's like they need a cryptographically signed intent mandate of what it was that the customer actually was asking for. So this is, I want a blue t-shirt, size medium, under $100, from this list of retailers, whatever it might be. And they need to have that sort of verified version of events of the intent of the customer. And then the final thing, I suppose tied to that is that the cardholder actually asked for this purchase to happen. They sort of explicitly authorized this agent with this purchase. Yeah, go and make that purchase. And so the final element of this program is what do we mean by an agentic error or an agentic issue that's being protected here by the purchase? This is about mistakes made by the agent. So this is like the wrong item was purchased, the wrong merchant was selected, orders were duplicated, the purchase was $800 when I asked it to be under 100, something like that. So, these are agent mistakes, but there's a bit of nuance to that because wrong item purchased. Well, maybe the merchant got some, surfaced the wrong item, even though the search or the page was the right one. So how do you actually define that mistake by an authorized agent? Rather than something that the merchant has done wrong. But I think that it's at the very least, I give American Express their plaudits because it clearly lays out here are the three things that we need that I think are consistent across pretty much every KYA discussion. We need to verify the agents themselves. We need to get some kind of authenticated intent of the user, and then we need to identify what do we mean by an agent getting something wrong rather than any of the various existing disputes that happen because the rest of the ecosystem has done something wrong. So yeah, it's super interesting, worth digging into.
And then I haven't looked into it as much as you have, Robbie, but my understanding is then if those three things prove to be correct, then Amex is taking the liability for it.
That's how I've read it as well currently. Forgive me for being skeptical of the reality of that. Or maybe I'll be kinder and say maybe like the longer term economics of that. I think that eventually you would anticipate that merchants become comfortable enough with the ecosystem that's been set up and the economics of paying, and therefore are, happier to take on some of the risk involved with the transaction. But yeah, I did to the poll answer that I think issuers should take the ultimate responsibility for problems with agents, mainly because they obviously have the final say in the approval or decline of the transaction. I think they should be given a lot more information than they currently receive to make a good decision. But Amex is obviously both network and issuer. And I think it does make sense. It's their customers. They're allowing this type of transaction to happen. So maybe they should take on the liability of that.
I'm going to go to Craig now. A little bit of history. Craig and I used to work together at MasterCard. So I know that, Craig, you've thought about this question, but it's a hard one, and I'm going to ask you anyways, which is MasterCard has the agent pay. One of the pillars there is agents are registered, which it also sounds like, that's part of Amex's pillar there. What do we think that I guess I have maybe a little bit of a hesitation because I work at a fraud company of bad agents are bad agents who aren't going to register.
Mhm.
And then is it merchants left holding the bag? I mean, it seems like that's kind of the likely scenario. I'm curious your thoughts, especially as you think about how do you actually force people to sign up to register their
That's
agents?
Yeah, that's literally I think the key what you just highlighted, force people or to get the ecosystem to a point where everybody's operating the same way. So the ghost agent, right? The unknown, unregistered agent is the concern right now. And up front, there's just not enough infrastructure and enough parties in place to get to that spot where you've got that ability to stop those ghost agents from interacting. I think there's a lot of themes around how that's going to mature over time and what you'll have as the various layers and levels. I am looking at it more like a broader ecosystem. I think there'll be multiple parties involved in providing KYA services and then being able to provide those signals into the right constituents. So we highlighted your question kind of showed the different parties that can be impacted. The consumer, they'll not likely have this, but the merchant is going to have some element of a KYA, like what party is coming in to interact with them. And we've focused really in the scenarios so far, it's really been a consumer to their agent, an agent to a merchant, but then you also have like merchant agent. So it starts to get really kind of wild as you go down the path. But it's really all about the trust and being able to have the right signals being able to be passed and to establish it so that ultimately if that becomes the norm and the standard and people see these things, if it's whether it's some parties are looking at tokenization, other people are looking at just signals, but whatever that can become the norm, the standard, that will allow for the parties to more easily see a known and trusted agent. And if there's a new agent or a ghost agent, that should pop. And then you have to figure out the next step of it. How do you get some trust ascribed to that agent, or do you just flat out block? But that's going to be the journey that we're going to be seeing. I know you asked the question of 24 months. That's where I think probably same thing. You've got some time that it's going to take to get this established and get to a spot where people feel more comfortable with how you discern those registered agents versus the ghost agents. And what do you do if you've got that ghost agent? You even asked that question before in the merchant side. It's like, well, there's the risk reward. Do you go forward and let some ghost agent interact with the hope that there's a conversion and you get the transaction? Or do you say, hey, I've seen and heard so many bad stories, I'm just going to block unless it's that known trusted agent? And especially when you get the questions of who all is owning that transaction and how that chargeback could potentially go down, I think those are the critical themes that are going to continue to be discussed and evolve.
Pravesh, I'm curious on your take as an issuer. You have a, obvious stake in what happens here. What do you think?
Well, I think I'll maybe circle back up what Craig and Robbie mentioned in different parts, right? So issuer definitely need more information and more control. Like I was one of the person also who voted that issuer has ultimate responsibility when something goes wrong, because the user will call the issuing bank and be like, "Hey, this happened with my funds. Where is the money?" Um, and if you see the journey so far, we've seen ACPs and UCPs and AP2s all really focused on merchant on ramp over their network, focused on ID and KYA and tokens, and taking all of that message to the issuer. Now I'm holding a bag, um, you know, uh, my network tells me it's a verified agent of a verified person with the intent to purchase a merchant verified, everything verified. But for me, how do I verify the intent, and where do I stand? Do I authorize? Do I not? Um, that's a big question, right? And I think that's also the biggest opportunity right now, so to speak, if we want to discuss there. But from a issuer standpoint, again, I think it kind of boils down. It boils down to trust, because end of the day, I think it's almost like we are the last the goalies at the goalpost. So last mile of defense before something goes right or wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other hard things that we haven't mentioned yet is the standards war, I'll call it. Robbie in our prep session flagged Fido's recent move to take on kind of an overarching standard for the space. There's many others, Visa, MasterCard, everybody wants to kind of own that for obvious reasons. Craig, the network seat that you're in has lived through every standards battle of the last 20 years. Is Fido the right home for this, or are we headed towards convergence, fragmentation? Do we now need to develop an orchestrator to orchestrate among the standards? What happens here?
Yeah, it does feel like I've used this analogy. I said it's like VHS. This will date me too. VHS and Betamax, but on steroids, like times 100. You've got a lot of different options, a lot of different protocols. I do believe that there's some need for one or two emerging standards to really stand out and to really get that traction. The ecosystem is not going to be able to support n number of different protocols, especially when you have parties that have to potentially then build or align to multiple standards so that they can process and transact in accordance, right? So I think there's this need for focus on that, and there's definite dialogue. I know from the Mastercard side, we have ongoing discourse as well, and trying to think about where that could play out in different standards bodies. Whether FIDO is the right one, I think they've got a good let's say seat at the table, but I think that's it. It's going to again all kind of evolve over time, and we're going to see as the iterative nature of the agentic space kind of plays out. We're going to see what really gets the traction. I still go back to the same kind of theme, which is in what is going to be critical is whatever standard really stands out. You're hoping that it's going to be global. You want it to be interoperable, and you want it to really focus on the right balance so that the trust model that we talked about earlier can exist. And that means what's the right balance of, we just talked about what the issuer needs to see, like what's the right balance of data that gets all the way through? What's the right balance of data that comes to from the consumer through the agent over to the merchant? Those are going to have to be thoughtfully explored, and I think what's going on right now in the early days is we're seeing some validations and some proof points, and they're going to come back and help us see whether or not that really is the correct answer. We need to kind of refine that, and so hopefully we see in short order some of these the standards, the approaches start to really come forward and be a little more dominant in focus, and kind of get to one or two real approaches that people can sink their teeth into. I think if we keep going forward with so many different protocols and approaches, that becomes very, very confusing for the market at the whole.
Anyone else want to opine?
Yeah, I think that one important point to note, because it does look like a standards war, it looks like there is that fight, and I agree with you, Jill, owning maybe that central bottleneck, however you do it as part of a protocol would be super valuable. Um, what we have in terms of real use cases for agentic today is you look at Alipay in China, and in February they had a big promotion, free bubble tea for everyone that used something with Quen, the Alipay like protocol that they use for agentic. I think it was 10 million orders within the first 9 hours and 100 million orders across the week that the promotion ran. If you haven't seen it, look for the videos of the bubble tea places as they came through. It was basically like a real life DDoS attack. Just receipts being fired from the machine as the orders came through. But it shows there's demand there. But I think importantly, it shows that there's demand there within a super app that has a closed ecosystem. Agentic for Alipay is very different than what we think of it with like a distributed, we have 1,000 apps on our phones that do all these different things separately. Really, the like equivalent would be if Apple and Google do something for like an Android and iOS ecosystem. But anyway, on the protocols part, there are protocols today that handle the commerce element of this, like UCP for Google and ACP for OpenAI, that they did with Stripe. And they're cool, but I think eventually we end up with actually, agentic commerce can happen however it happens within that ecosystem. The really important part is the KYA, the actual payment handling element of that. And those are things that we have standards today that exist that are universal, that everyone ends up adhering to. So at the end of the day, the protocols will be interoperable to an extent. I think you're probably going to get a lot of within their own ecosystem stuff happening for the big tech players, but ultimately, in the same way that 3D Secure is sort of an open-ish protocol to networks under EMVCo and beyond, and that we have passkeys as well as this sort of open standard. These are things where there's real challenges. The industry has solved it, agreed that there's a solution to do it, and now we have an answer to it, and everyone knows what to build towards. So, yeah, I'm not too concerned about fragmentation. So I think that, yeah, to your point, Craig, so like everyone knows the problems we're trying to solve here. There will not be a perfect answer, but there will be an agreement that there is a right way of going about it. And version 1 of that doesn't need to be what lasts forever, because we've got 3DS 2 point whatever it is now, building on previous protocols. So
super interesting. For those who are in the virtual room, we're going to open up to questions in like 10 minutes. So think of your questions, put them in the chat, and I will pull some out. But we'll go to kind of the broader panel's thoughts on biggest commercial opportunities that you see. So looking 18 months out, what are those commercial opportunities that you feel like have really kind of opened up, maybe addressing some of these gaps? Who wants to start?
I mean, I can start with one thought. I know that a lot of the focus is on the agentic commerce side, and I think it's fair. There's this excitement side in the payments area. I do think that as we highlighted and as Robbie was calling out, we're going to get to these core nuggets and standards, but ultimately we also see the other side of agentic and agentic interactions, let's call it like that. So, Joanna, you could just as easily use an agent to go and find and apply for a new credit card for you, or open a bank account, or go and create an account with some merchant, right? So you can do all those things. Those don't necessarily tie back specifically to transactions. So ultimately, there's utilization there, and I think the what we highlighted is that ability to create that trust, and that center of trust, and then convey that trust out helps. It's not that different than what we see today with e-commerce, but it's shifting where we have agents and you have proxies. So it's how do you help both ensure that you have trust in the agent and then the consumer behind that, and then make sure that the interactions are meaningful. So to allow, to your point, that you brought up earlier, allow those good agents and good actors in, and then find a way to defend against the bad actors and bad agents that could be out to do n number of things on your ecosystem. So I do think that's going to be an interesting area of focus, and some viability in the probably, you said, like 18 months time frame.
To piggyback on Craig, what you mentioned, I think my prediction would be something similar on all layers, right? The trust anchor, so to speak. From my seat as a issuer, say an issuer who has figured out how to do this distinction correctly, and how to enable this commerce without being a blocker. Whatever layer, anchor, protocol, um, processor technology, etc., that allows us to do that. I think that would be the biggest opening from my seat, at least in next 18 months, maybe shorter, but 18 months for sure.
As I was thinking to answer this one as well, I was sort of got stolen by Claude a little bit with their Anthropic's virtual card stuff. But I think there's maybe an opportunity for, a card product, some kind of payment product that has like settable restrictions on it from a consumer perspective, in the same way I look at, the massive growth of Cash App, Venmo, Buy Now Pay Later, and all of these are, alternative payment methods or neobanks, but they're card-based payments, and you can freeze your account in Cash App, which people find very useful. I'm super interested in the idea that you give a customer control of a card that they have given authority to an agent on, and let them set, don't buy anything for me above $200 unless I'm in the loop, but everything else is fine. And Jelena, to your points as well early in the session about, when we get to autonomous, I think that would be really interesting to give consumers almost that level of control. How autonomous do you want these agents to be able to go? And maybe it doesn't have to be card infrastructure. I just think that it is such a natural, nice extension of the sorts of features that we see today, whether it's paying it off over time, freezing accounts, whatever it might be. How much of a leap is it in the next 18 months to get to, setting explicit purchasing rules, which actually already exist today with a lot of like MCC restrictions and stuff like that.
And you can feel like that would be pretty easy to do, at least setting these restrictions with a virtual card. You can already spin up a virtual card that has a finite limit on it. It's just applied to a slightly different use case here. One of the questions in the chat that kind of speaks to this, as well as what you said, Robbie, earlier about the super apps and big tech having a play here. That's definitely my bias. So I'll ask Brent's question here. The trust chain you described, known agent, trusted agent, represented principal, assumes someone is actually issuing and maintaining that credential. Visa and MasterCard own the rule book for what makes a valid card holder. Is there equivalent standards body emerging for agent credentialing, or does that just fragment by network? I think this is a really good question, and it's something I personally spend a lot of time on and have in the past. I know Craig has as well, but my personal bias is that this is a really fantastic opportunity for big tech, Apple and Google here in the US and others elsewhere to not only be that issuer, but be the kind of wallet that holds three things: the issued driver's license and or digital passport, a type of verifiable credential, temporary credential that talks about the agent's intent. And then third, they already have the payment card in them virtually. And I think that's a very, very powerful combination when you start to think about this as fully autonomous of, hey, my agent using my iPhone has access to my wallet with identity, permissions, and card to pay all in one. And we already know that Apple and Google are creating that infrastructure for mobile driver's licenses here in the US, and creating interoperability with digital kind of credentials and identities elsewhere. So either they didn't foresee this and this makes them look brilliant, or they were thinking ahead many, many years. Because while it took them 20, 30 years really to get the payment card, the digital Apple Wallet card taken off, now that's the same motion of, hey, I can go into a liquor store, tap my iPhone, and it's actually going to prove my identity. And that's one of the things I keep coming back to, that Apple and Google, if you're listening, that's very smart of you to think through. But curious anyone else's thoughts on that.
That's a very interesting theme across the board. I think that we ask this in different ways today, but there's the ecosystem is being built up. We've got thoughts and approaches towards how agents, and when I'm saying agent, I'm talking about not necessarily the instance of an agent, but we call it the fingerprint, the root, like how that agent is identified and then how trust is established. And it's a little bit different, like how you described it, Jelena. I would look at that as like that's more your binding side, and that's fair. That's like you, Jelena, the consumer plus your card, plus then that the agent that you've chosen, and then creating a binding. That's a valid token or a validation point. But I think the other piece is the agent that's sitting out and operating kind of on a server somewhere and then representing you. I keep calling it like the fingerprint, but what that represents and then its behavior across time and space is really a critical theme. So I think we're going to see some parties, you brought up earlier, standards. I think we're going to see some standardization over time, but ultimately right now, agents and bots look very similar. Bots typically have bad connotations. So there's elements where people are blocking the bots because it's non-human, it's synthetic interaction. So then you really get to a spot of how do you discern synthetic transactions to be then related to an agent, and then how can you say back to that it's an agent, now it's also a trusted agent? What type of authority is there that can share that and say, here you go? And then it goes a little bit back to the same thing, which is even if I had some type of token that established that authority to say like this was or this is a credentialed agent, very much similar to what we talked about earlier with the KYC and the consumer and me creating an account up front. You validate me as I'm creating the account. That doesn't mean 6 months from now I'm still like you can still trust that me, the person is logging in, or it's an imposter logging into the account that was created. So I think that's the I'm trying to give you the constructs. I think we will have like some validation of the agent, that how did it come to being, and here we go. This we know about it then, and you're going to have some signals that come across the networks that look at its behavior over time to kind of establish its level of trust or risk.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to the final question here in the chat. This one's a very interesting one. 3DS was built to pass behavioral and device signals so the issuer can score risk in the moment. When an agent is generating all of those signals, the model is essentially evaluating itself. Thoughts on a structural fix for that, or does the whole 3DS architecture need to be rethought for the agentic flow?
Yeah. I am I have a short answer and thought on this, which is, when I first heard about 3DS version 2 and was digging into some of the data points that, can be passed to in order to help issuers make their decision. One of them is the angle of the device that is being held by, the purchaser at that point in time. I think if you asked someone 20, 30 years ago in e-commerce if that would ever be a relevant data point, such that it was a standard data element in a, standardized protocol that everyone was using, they'd be a very smart person to have thought about that. My thinking is that we end up with something that captures similar types of data as with respect to agents. It's not the same. It is difficult. AI agents, especially bad acting ones, will be purposefully built or instructed to avoid detection and act in quote unquote normal ways. But fundamentally, there's still an entity here doing stuff to initiate a payment, and there are data points there that can be used to infer intent. But honestly, we haven't even solved this for humans yet. We still have scams and first party fraud as well. You cannot get inside the brain to find out whether they legitimately are going to want to make this purchase or not. And we don't even know really how large language models work. We sort of know technically how they do, but we don't know what's going on in the matrices and stuff going on in there. So it's tricky, and I think it's a scary thing. But it's all about getting the channel to a space where there is a low enough level of fraud and disputes that it is a viable channel. And that is a constant battle for every channel. We still haven't solved it for cash payments in physical brick and mortar establishments. We're not going to solve it for this straight off the bat, that's for sure.
My favorite part about working in fraud is that there will always be fraud, always, period. In fact, there is a good argument that the optimal level of consumer fraud is not zero. We can talk about that offline, but fraudsters will always find a way. Craig, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say on top of that, the call out. I think the other position that I think is interesting to consider is I know we're talking about agentic commerce, and I know, Jelena, your preference for the autonomous flows is very clear. I think, though, there's this other side of it, which is it's an interesting thing. What is called out around the overall prompt or the question about what we can infer from an agent's behavior, that it's very true. That's very much what the agent is doing. We talked about some of the signals that you look at the agent, but ultimately, if I'm really looking at it, it's important that somehow I can go back and say, all right, when I had Jelena in the loop, when she was part and interacting with this agent, what was it really, Jelena? Can we have that intent? Is it a way that we can capture that and verify that? And also, ultimately, the other thing that's just, again, ponder this very often, but when we look at the opportunity around agentic, there's a lot of processing power, a lot of very powerful computations that it can offer. But the question is, are we really looking for it to just do everything, or is it about the ability to harness agentic and then bring the consumer back into the flow as appropriate and as is defined or designed by that consumer? Meaning, like, hey, I don't want to be woken up in the middle of the night, but the first thing in the morning when I'm drinking my coffee is a perfect time to come back to me with key questions, and I'm happy to go ahead and approve it at that point in time. Cool, do it like that. So that framing also then puts the human in the loop and allows those human signals to get brought back into the flow, while the agentic power is still doing the hard work that it needs to do. So it's just one other aspect of looking at this.
Yeah. I think that's a good final thought to wrap up on. The theme is there's going to continue to be a lot of questions. There's going to continue to be limited answers, but I I love the conversation we had, and thank you guys for sharing your knowledge.
Thanks so much, Yelena, and the rest of the panelists. This was a great conversation. I was really intrigued by the dialogue. And to wrap up, before we break out in breakout rooms, the next session is going to be June 24th. The theme is going to be practical strategies to reduce the cost of the card acceptance. Different theme, same NIPay DNA. You can register on the website. And without further ado, Nikki is going to drop us into smaller rooms for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then we're going to reconvene for a closing. Thanks so much.